Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle. Above me on the screen, Joe Clark, and the countdown is on. Pittsburgh Steelers training camp begins in 2 weeks from yesterday. Players will be reporting on that Tuesday, starting practice on Wednesday. And it won't be the padded practices at first. There'll be a few unpadded and then a small break, and then they will hop into the moment we've all been waiting for when everything starts to actually feel like football season. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I can't remember who you kind of predicted to win the World Cup, but has it gone the way you saw it going, or have there been some weird twists and turns?
I had France winning, so a little bit of not. I mean, it's not them, but kind of chalk. I mean, I think
Yeah.
Spain was the favorite heading in. Argentina was in the final last time, so not a huge surprise there. The Argentina game yesterday was awesome. They are so good late in games. England kind of parked the bus too early, and Argentina took advantage. So I'm excited. That'll be a fun final on Sunday.
Yeah, it's nice to see that it's not just football where playing prevent defense prevents you from winning the game. It turns out that that's in all sports. You got to keep the gas pedal down. England did not, and they paid for it. So today we're going to talk about a few Steelers-related topics. It's still a little bit light. There's still not that much going on, but there are some interesting lists and such that have been published. ESPN just today shared six six Steelers who they think could fetch first round picks in a hypothetical trade. Of course, this isn't anything that's actually happening, but it is interesting to see how the league values certain players. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about all the different players and their pre-camp routines. There's some team getaways, some retreats, some training videos being posted. We'll talk about some of that. And then we'll finish things up with a discussion on the roster bubble. We don't have a listener question today, so this is your reminder to call those in, 412-254-3145. Just call, leave a voicemail, tell us your name and where you're from. If you don't want your voice on the show, that's fine. Send us a text at that same number. And if I talk too fast, that's in the show description as well, wherever you're watching this. Joe, first thing this morning, I wake up and I see ESPN publishes a list of every team's first round trade value players. And so in my head, I'm like, oh boy, how many are the Steelers going to have any? To my surprise, they had six, and those six actually had them tied for the second most or seventh most because there were several with seven players. The Steelers had six. So not that many teams had really more than them. However, some teams did have, I guess they listed multiple first-round picks or a first-round pick and then some. The Steelers only had six in the just a first-round pick category, so they didn't have those super, super high-value players, but they did have a good volume of them. Joe, I'm going to read you this list, and I guess you could just tell me your knee-jerk thoughts once we're through it here. Keanu Benton, Joey Porter Jr., Nick Herbig, Troy Fautanu, Derek Harmon, Zach Frazier. That rounds out the six. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's four on there that you can kind of say totally agree with. I think Porter, Fautanu, Harmon, and Frazier. Frazier's one of the best centers in the league. The positional value of center has kind of risen over the last few years. Derek Harmon looks to be an ascending defensive lineman. Troy Fautanu looks to be an ascending offensive lineman. Played like one of the best in the league last year at right tackle. And Joey Porter Jr. has been a shutdown number one cornerback. I think Keanu Benton is a very surprise inclusion on that list. I was kind of shocked to see him. I would take a first round pick for Keanu Benton if I could get one, especially with his contract up. And they did factor in, contracts and the value because Joey Porter Jr. was mentioned in the write up as, the reason why he wasn't more was because of, he only has 1 year left on his contract. Well, so does Keanu Benton. I also think Nick Herbig was a little interesting just because he just signed that big extension. I think maybe he has to prove he can live up to that before a team would give a first round pick for him. I mean, I think it's certainly more equivalent to his value than some of the trade speculation that was being made earlier this offseason. That was, the Steelers should trade Nick Herbig for Tanner
I
McKee,
knew you were
which was
going there.
just completely baseless. I think this is a lot closer to his value than that, but still a little bit of a surprise to see him listed as somebody that would be a surefire first round pick. But yeah, mean, I think it's a pretty good list. I think Benton is the surprise there. He, hasn't proven a ton. He did kind of have a little bit of a breakout as a pass rusher last season. And I definitely think he's a solid player, no disrespect to him, but to see him listed as being, a value of his first round pick was one that was to me the biggest surprise on that list.
Yeah, I mean, you see what he had 5.5 sacks last year. That is actually a pretty strong number for a defensive tackle. So you kind of wrestle in your head, okay, well, why do Steelers fans not seem to like him as much as, man, any other defensive lineman that had 5.5 sacks, especially someone who's playing a good amount of their snaps at nose tackle? You'd think that is like a top guy, like a Dexter Lawrence or somebody like that, capable of just being a franchise kind of cornerstone for the defensive line. And so why is it? And I think it has to do with the run defense and some of the stuff that maybe doesn't show up on the box score as much. He tended to get kind of pushed back off of his spot, or he'd kind of maybe do an aggressive move and work himself out of his responsibility. As a two-gap player, you're really not supposed to kind of lone wolf or kind of renegade your way through. You really have one job, and it's to sit there and occupy blockers and make sure nobody gets through the A gap on either side of you. And, Benton a lot of times would get kind of sidetracked and go on his little side missions, and next thing you know, there's a big old gap up the middle of the defense, and that's a lot of what we saw at times, the Steelers getting gashed up the middle. And so, yeah, I think anyone who actually watched a lot of Benton, I don't think anyone in their right mind would trade a first round pick for him, but certainly if anyone thinks that he's capable of that, and I'm not saying he's not capable of becoming that. I think, maybe if he got into a 4-3 defense, could he turn into that type of player? Maybe not a first rounder in my mind, but he could turn into a second round, trade value kind of guy, maybe sneak into the first, for the right situation, I suppose. But, right now, based off of what we've seen, that certainly is rich. Was the Tanner McKee trade, was that also a Barnwell concoction?
I think it was, and I was him and Nina Kimes. She was the other one who was pushing something similar
I
for
don't
her,
think
but I
Nina
think Barnwell
Kimes would
was
have
the
done that.
first one. Yeah, so maybe Barnwell was definitely the first one that brought it up.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
that wrote about it. So kind of interesting now that he has this as Herbig as the guy.
right. Yeah. Well, hey, when you get paid $100 million, I guess people view you in a different light. It is interesting, and I think I kind of had this conversation. I must have been with Dave or Alex. I don't know. On the other podcast, we were talking about what does it take for Joey Porter Jr. to start getting viewed as one of the top guys. And it might be as simple as him just getting paid, because I don't really think he's going to be this guy who gets a bunch of interceptions. So how do you crack the list of top 10 corners? I think his talent's already kind of basically there. It just depends, what you're looking for. If you're looking for the interceptions, that's probably, I don't really think that interceptions is the greatest measure of a cornerback's talent. But certainly if Porter were to get paid something like $30 million, I think he'd start to sneak onto those top 10 lists just by way of, well, he's getting paid top, so you kind of have to start your list looking at the top and work your way down, and maybe Porter gets some more favor in there. So, yeah, I think there is something to a player getting paid, and you just kind of view them in a bigger light, and I think that's kind of rightfully so. Also, it raises the expectations and whatnot. But I think you're right with Nick Herbig. He does kind of have to prove his deal at this point. He's never actually started. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but he's never actually started a full season worth of snaps. He's got some stuff to prove still. He has some injury stuff to his name from last year. And now that he's signed to that kind of money, he's not just a cheap, maybe a team would send a first round pick for somebody on a fourth round rookie contract, but maybe not when you're paying a guy $100 million over however many years. So, yeah, I thought it was an interesting list overall. My biggest takeaway from the whole list is the fact that Omar Khan has, kind of hit it out of the park with some of his recent draft classes, because, as I said earlier, most of the teams on the list had either, the Steelers were the second most on the list. A lot of teams had 7 players. The Steelers had 6, but all of the Steelers' 6 are either on rookie contracts or just coming off rookie contracts. And that wasn't the case for some of the teams ahead of them. There were, your Myles Garretts of the world and guys who have been around forever, quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes on the list for some of those teams. And so really the Steelers, with this kind of core of 6 players, shows, hey, there is a bright future ahead. they've kind of done a good job drafting, and I think that there's a solid foundation to move forward with how old this team is right now, that point I think kind of gets lost a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're all these players were Omar Khan selections. I mean, even DK Metcalf was mentioned. Who had just missed, and that was a guy that I mean, Omar Khan gave up a second round pick for. But if Metcalf has a really strong year this year, you just exercise again next year. I think he could maybe be a guy that jumps back into that first round pick consideration.
Who are some other names that could be on here? Maybe not like right now, but who are some guys on the team currently that you could see working their way into this conversation in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think Max Ahanachour is a big one. If you look at the list, there's a ton of, I mean, even guys that were just drafted in the first round offensive tackles, Monroe Freeling, Blake Miller are both on the list, but a lot of second year offensive tackles. Josh Simmons from the Chiefs, Josh Connerly from the Commanders. So if Ahanachour gets his opportunity and plays well this year, I mean, he's a guy that I think is absolutely could be on, you could make the list. Um, Outside of that, I mean, maybe if Mason McCormick has another strong year, but guards are kind of tough when you're looking at,
Yeah.
giving up a first round pick for a guard. So I wouldn't really say him, but I mean, I think he is, an ascending young player. He had a really solid year last year, and I think he could certainly replicate that this year. But just the positional value of a guard for a first rounder would be a little bit tough. But yeah, I mean, I think Hanachour is the big one that could certainly jump on the list.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. I don't really think so. But you look at the list, and there's six, maybe seven if we include Ihanachour, maybe really six if you take Benton off of there. Um, Omar Khan hasn't made six first round picks, so that tells you that he's drafting pretty well, back to the point I was just making there. So, yeah, I think there is a bright future for the team. It's just people can't see that until they get their quarterback and whatnot. Oh, is that one? Could, Drew Aller or Will Howard work their way into that discussion? It's not impossible. I mean, it just depends what you think of those guys and if they can become a franchise quarterback. As soon as you are a franchise quarterback, a guy who the league views can start for 5, 6, 7+ seasons, you're in first round territory for sure. So maybe one of those guys could sneak onto the list. I think that's probably about it. Anyone else from this rookie class? I mean, Jeremy Bernard, maybe wide receiver is a premium position. Could Jack Sawyer eventually turn into a force? Maybe should Alex Highsmith be on this list because of how cheap his contract is? I mean, if it wasn't for his injury history, I think he deserves some recognition on there. And so there's quite a few that the Steelers have that could be, and maybe some who could be worth more than a first round pick. Could Joey Porter Jr. end up becoming one of those guys? We've seen Sauce Gardner and some others get traded for multiple first round picks kind of territory. And so Porter could be one of those guys. Maybe Harmon could turn into one of those guys. Maybe not Frazier just because the center market in general, but certainly Troy Fautanu could turn into one of those guys. Nick Herbig, if he lives up to his contract. So, point being, this roster is in pretty good spot when it comes to the young core, and I really want to drill that point home because I think people just think old roster. Oh gosh, they desperately need to rebuild. The rebuild's well underway. While they have been going all in for the last couple of years, I think they've been kind of walking that line pretty well. Anything else on this? TJ Watt and DK Metcalf were left off of the list, notably. Any thoughts there, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly surprised given, Watt's age and his contract, and he's coming off a down year, and the fact that Metcalf was just traded for a second round pick. I think Barnwell pointed out though, when Von Miller got traded, the Broncos only got second and third round picks and had to eat the majority of his contract. I was a little bit surprised to see, some of the edge rushers who were listed. I mean, Nick Bosa is younger, but the he Barnwell listed for Bosa, it was first round pick and more for him, which I thought was a little bit surprising. Just given the fact he's coming off the second ACL tear, is that a guy that team will really give a first round pick and then some for? I think he was also listed below Watt or one spot ahead of him on the list of the scouts executives of the top edge rushers. So to see him, listed, pretty substantially ahead of Watt was a little bit of a surprise for me. But he is younger. And I'm not totally surprised that, Watt had a slow end to 2024 and then 2025 just wasn't up to his usual standard. So not completely surprised he wasn't on the list. And, hopefully, strong season this year. Maybe he ends up back on it. Will be a little bit older, but if he gets back to being a 15 plus sack player, then that's a player who's worth a first round pick, in my opinion.
Yeah, even with that contract, I mean, the contract makes it harder to trade him, but there is a lot of guaranteed and signing bonus money that won't follow him in a trade. And so it's really just the base salary, which he does have a high base salary, but the right team, like a Rams or, anyone who's kind of in a win now mode, maybe the Chiefs, maybe the Seahawks continue to be in that mode. I don't know. Those kind of teams could feasibly, make a move for somebody like a Watt if they feel like they're one pass rusher away. Certainly, he could deserve to be on this list. Metcalf, I don't think he has any reason to be included on this list. The Steelers got him for a second and then paid him more money. He had one of his worst years, and so he has a lot to prove this year in terms of being a first round pick. But certainly, he's capable. He's had seasons in the past that would suggest he could be worth a first round pick. So I think that's enough on this discussion. Let's move into some of the pre-camp routines going on around the roster. You've got a couple different approaches. You got some players that are on vacations and getting married, and I don't know if any have had babies, but that's usually the time of year that starts to happen while they can spend some time with the newborn. And then you got some just kind of relaxing. You got Aaron Rodgers and several offensive players following him to, did they actually say where it was? Just somewhere out west, some undisclosed location out west. It looked like a Yellowstone or one of those kind of national park type deals. And he brought several of his players. Joe, you wrote about that over the weekend. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so it was an interesting group. Ben Skoranek, who I think has been reported as kind of Rogers' best friend on the team. It was him, Pat Fryermuth, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman Jr., Roman Wilson, and then Mason Rudolph was there as well. Roman Wilson, I think, pretty unanimously was thought to be the most surprise inclusion on the list because there is some murmurs that him and Aaron Rodgers weren't on the same page. I mean, they weren't on the same page on the field, but there was a report earlier this offseason from Mark Kabali that he heard that maybe Roman Wilson wouldn't be happy if Aaron Rodgers came back, but he's out bonding with them, bonding with his fellow receivers. I mean, I think that's a good sign maybe for their chemistry earlier this year. I know Mike DeFabo reported, at the onset of OTAs that their connection had looked a lot better this year than it
Mm-hmm.
did at any point last year. So certainly something to monitor with him. But yeah, I mean, pretty normal list. You have your pass catchers, you have another quarterback there. The guys that you need a bond with and build chemistry. People were questioning, why Jeremy Bernard wasn't there. What he was working out with the route god. Maybe he had other pre-existing plans. I think there's a little bit of people reading too much into who wasn't there. It was, it could have just been one of those things where Rogers gives a blanket invite and players have things going on. You have pre-existing plans that you don't move. So, solid group of people there. Rogers kind of again hinted that, or after saying this would be his last year, his post on the matter just said it was the last rodeo. So second year in a row, he kind of gets the guys together, and that's something that I think is a strength of having him as a veteran quarterback. I know Adam Thielen said, and he joined the team late last year, but during the season, Rodgers had people over for Christmas parties, just getting the guys together every week, hosting dinners and all that. So just from a chemistry standpoint, that's always a good thing to see.
Yeah, what not to read into this is, oh, well, Jeremy Bernard's not going to be the wide receiver 3, or Will Howard's not going to make the team because he wasn't there, or Mason Rudolph's definitely going to be the top backup. These are not things worthwhile trying to read into this. Like you said, probably a blanket invite. I don't know if you mentioned it, but Howard was at a wedding, and again, this is the only time players can really do their own thing, and so the schedule gets booked up rather quick this time of year for a lot of players. Ben Skoranek being there surprised some, but probably shouldn't. He's very close with Aaron Rodgers. I think we pointed that out during the Kennywood week. Any photo you saw with Rodgers, Skoranek was right there with him. Seems like he's kind of in his hip pocket, following him around. It seems like those two are kind of fast friends. So Jeremy Bernard, you mentioned working with Route God. We saw Kaleb Johnson working with David Montgomery, which I thought was good. He was in Phoenix, which he worked out there last year and credited coming to training camp in really good shape for working out in Phoenix. He'd work outside in the 110-degree heat. Joe, you just experienced that in Phoenix not too long ago yourself. Can you imagine working out in there for a couple of weeks outside?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, he did that last year. He's doing it again this year. And, you say, oh, well, last year wasn't great. So, maybe he should change his routine. I don't think that that's why it wasn't great. Mike Tomlin frequently praised how well he came to camp and what good condition he was in and how that could be kind of a springboard for his success as a rookie. Obviously, that didn't come to pass, but expect him to show up to camp in good shape. And maybe he's learned some stuff from David Montgomery, a seasoned veteran and accomplished veteran in this league. Also, there was Jaleel McLaughlin from the Broncos. So I don't know if there were others as well, but an interesting note there. We saw Jaylen Warren. He's been hard at work for weeks. We saw him pulling soccer goals, soccer nets. The NFL reposted that for kind of World Cup, hype. But he's been hard at work posting all kinds of videos, getting ready. So that's good to see as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of players that are training that we haven't seen. Not everybody posts on social media. So I think it's shaping up. Everybody's locked in. Now, Joe, do you have any concerns that like last year the guys got together in, what was it, San Diego or wherever, UCLA, wherever that was with Aaron Rodgers and kind of actually worked. Like they were throwing routes and working like football stuff. It seemed like this trip, maybe there was some of that. I have no idea. It didn't really look like it from the photos, but maybe there was. But do you have any concerns at all that it was more of just kind of a hangout than maybe a workout?
No, not really at all, especially because you look at basically everybody except for Pittman that was there has experience working with Aaron Rodgers. There's no really getting to know him and what he wants. And Pittman worked with him during, OTAs and the offseason when Rodgers was there. So he's had his opportunities. And Pittman said when he signed with the Steelers that he's known Rodgers in the past. And I think he mentioned that maybe once he's in the past maybe trained or worked out with him. So not really concerned about that at all. Just good to see those guys bonding. They'll have plenty of time to get in sync over the next few weeks when training camp begins.
Yeah, Rodgers said last year at one point that teams that drink together win together. And I think that's kind of the approach he's taking here. And yeah, you're right. He was there for OTAs and all that. So he last year didn't necessarily get as much work in with these guys. And this year he kind of did. So maybe not as necessary to have a formal workout, though maybe they did. Maybe they did at this, at least certainly they would have talked football to some extent during this trip. So I think, what was it? Aditi Kinkabwala on The Fan trying to make a big deal out of Roman Wilson having in the group photo where Aaron Rodgers was in there. Aaron Rodgers and Roman Wilson were right next to each other, and Aaron Rodgers had his arm around Roman Wilson. Somehow that was supposed to be a big deal. Again, wouldn't read too much into any of that because, I think that's a little bit ridiculous. Aditi's point is that Rodgers seems to do everything intentionally, and I don't know if I even really buy that premise, to be honest with you. I think there's some kind of like legend or mystique of Aaron Rodgers, and some of it is true, but man, I think a lot of it's just overblown media crap, to be honest with you. So the last rodeo aspect of it, I mean, we've known it's the last rodeo. He really seems to be doubling down. So again, I wouldn't expect him to be back next year or anything like that. But is it in your head, is it bad at all that he's kind of put this out there so early?
I don't think so. And I think Jerome Bettis made a good point a few weeks ago. And I mean, he kind of the Steelers route around his last season in 2005 that maybe if anything, it provides a little bit of motivation knowing that it's Rodgers last year. He's a well-liked member of the team, and guys seem to rally around him, and they're going to want him to go out on a high note, and it might provide just a little extra motivation for knowing that this is it for him, and that guys are going to want to win for him, and kind of after last season ended in a disappointing fashion, kind of we might not be talking when the Super Bowl they did it for Bettis, but at least maybe try to go on a run in the postseason, and the guys come out early in the season a little extra motivation. So that could certainly be a positive for that he put it out there. So not really concerned. I mean, he put it out there last year that it was likely his last season. Then he kind of walked it back a little bit. Sure, guys in the locker room had more of a sense than what we had from what was getting put out there, but yeah, it does feel like there is a sense of finality with this, and yeah, no issue with him putting it out there. And if anything, I think it can be a good thing.
Fair enough. You just wrote about Roman Wilson for the site today, SteelersDepot.com. And we're going to talk about some roster bubble players, and Roman Wilson will be talked about in that conversation. I don't know if he deserves to be there or not, but we'll start the conversation off there. Joe, what was said about him? I think it was Max Starks talking about Roman Wilson.
Yeah, so on Sirius XM yesterday, him and Rhett Lewis kind of named their breakout players for some teams around the league, and Rhett Lewis mentioned Roman Wilson, said he just thinks there's more on the bone for him. And Starks kind of said, he's like, yeah, he's like, there is, but he's like, it's a make or break year. He said, whether it's a breakout or just breaking and cracking the 53-man roster, I think for Roman Wilson, that has to be the top of the priority list for him to figure out if truly he is going to be a Steeler. So kind of basically putting the onus on him to have a strong training camp or he's going to be on the roster bubble, which I think he's entering camp ahead of Jeremy Bernard. Mike DeFabo mentioned, and a couple of times that Roman Wilson will get the chance to start. But if he struggles, then and Bernard passes him, and you have, an Eli Heidenreich potentially could play a little bit receiver. You have Caden Weejan, and you have some of these other guys that maybe like a Max Hurleman or an A.T. Perry plays well. Is it worth keeping Roman Wilson if he's just going to be a game day inactive? You kind of know what he is at this point. So he's a guy that if he struggles in camp could potentially be a little bit of a surprise cut. I think, him keeping his spot and maybe even starting the season in the slot and is more likely than him getting cut, but there's certainly a real case for him to not be on the roster if he starts slow or just doesn't what happened last year and he just doesn't end up getting on the same page with Rodgers.
This time last year, there was so much hype. Like every beat writer that goes to practice and talks about, Roman Wilson, it's like glowing reports. They call him like an all practice player. Like he always looks good at practice, but whatever reason it didn't translate into the games. So I have a hard time seeing him not make the team just because he is such a good practicer. And, that's what they're going to be primarily doing is practicing. And so, what would it have to look like for him not to be on, doing well? I have a hard time seeing that happening, but certainly I think there is a world in which he doesn't make the roster. I mean, you have DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Jeremy Bernard, Roman Wilson, Ben Skoranek, Caden Weejan. Those are the 6 that I kind of had penciled in on my roster prediction. But I mean, who are the others that could maybe sneak onto there, or would they just keep 5?
There's certainly a chance they could just keep 5 and keep more elsewhere. I mean, you look at safety there, you have 3 guys competing for 2 spots or maybe even 1 spot. You have potentially, you look at tight end. You could keep maybe a Robert Tonyan if you want to, if you only keep 5 receivers. You could keep an extra running back, so there's special teams guy like, the Heidenreich or Travis Homer. So there's other positions where you could potentially keep more. I mean, it would take a lot for, I think, somebody else to sneak into that mix. You would have to look. I mean, A.T. Perry did have a strong rookie season with the Saints. He's got, he's got the intangibles. He's got a good build. Hurleman impressed in training camp and in the preseason last year, but and he is a versatile guy. But if you look at him, you're kind of looking like he's very similar to like Heidenreich. Would you rather just keep Heidenreich, given you drafted him, and there might be some more upside there? So I think it would be very tough for somebody else to sneak in as the 6th. I think it would be more likely that you would just keep 5 and carry more depth elsewhere.
Yeah, maybe the 4th quarterback or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess we'll get into that conversation later in the process here, but yeah, there's a lot of weird, kind of tough decisions to make, and certainly Roman Wilson or Kaleb Johnson's probably a better example here. That's one I wanted to talk about. Kaleb Johnson, we've talked about it a little bit, but Travis Homer, Eli Heidenreich, anybody else on that list? I think, what was that standout? Is Lou Nichols still around? I think he is.
He is.
So there's some competition there, and there's sometimes those guys can really stand out in camp. And Lou Nichols, a lot of people were calling for Lou Nichols last year after a strong preseason, and so somebody like Kaleb Johnson doesn't stand out and he doesn't have a special teams value, then what's his role? And so Travis Homer, special teams value. Eli Heidenreich, I think special teams value. Kaleb Johnson, what exactly is he going to do? I think I pulled a study of Mike McCarthy's 5 years in Dallas and how he divided the labor between the top running backs. And, he has a hard time even finding good work for the second running back a lot of the time. And so if you're talking about the third running back, you basically are getting nothing. And then you have to contribute on special teams. You can't just be carrying a guy on a 53. I mean, it's so hard to form a 53-man roster as it is. You can't have a guy on there that's basically doing nothing, especially when you're looking at Jaylen Warren, who doesn't he have 2 years left on his deal? And Dowdle, 2 years. They just signed him to 2 years as well, I think. Is that right? Pretty sure that's the case.
Yeah.
So there's 2 years left on both of those guys. And so what are you even keeping him around for at that point? So I think Kaleb Johnson might be in big trouble.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, he just didn't really get any opportunities last year. It's rare for a rookie drafted in the top 100 who got as little work as he did to then go and have a successful career. I saw a list the other day. I think Tonyan Drake was the only one that even managed to kind of carve out a career for himself. So definitely a guy that I think is in trouble unless he has a really strong camp.
Is he somebody that anyone would even trade for? Maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody would give a late round pick for him. I mean, I think you could probably get, conditional sixth or something for him at this point.
Yeah.
If a team, somebody has an injury, you need help in the running back room in general. I think he's definitely tradable as a young player who was taken in the top 100. So chance for that for sure. But yeah, I think he really has to prove himself during training camp.
Talked about Tonyan and Nowakowski. Yeah, is there a spot for both of those guys? I don't, that's where you have to start to eliminate one of these guys. Is Kaleb Johnson gone so you can keep both of those? Is Roman Wilson gone so you can keep both of those? Are they even going to keep both of those? I forget who it was, but kind of saying Nowakowski isn't as big of a lock as people think he is. I don't know if I buy that. What is your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Nowakowski would be a lot safer than Tonyan. Excuse me. I wrote the other day that I think tight end could be a position where they only keep two true tight ends because Nowakowski kind of worked everywhere. He said during OTAs, I think Ramon Young said he spent more time in the tight end room than the running back room at points. He was working out, is as a receiving tight end, so that could be your third tight end, and he still gives you, that Connor Hayward role. He can block a little bit, play on special teams. And if the team wants to use him as a fullback, you can still use him as a fullback. So I think he's a lot safer than Robert Tonyan would be. But Tonyan does have the connection with Aaron Rodgers. How much that matters, we'll see. But if the two of them are clicking, then maybe it gets a little difficult to keep both of them. But I would think Nowakowski is probably pretty safe, even if they do keep both, and then you just subtract elsewhere.
Yeah, when I look at who you can actually get to the practice squad without getting poached, Tonyan's a guy who I would you look at Marcus Valdes-Scantling last year and some of these other veterans they've been able to stash on there. Ever since they relaxed those practice squad rules and started allowing more veterans, it's really a good tool to stash these kind of later career guys who maybe are more valuable to the Steelers than anybody else. That's kind of the case with Tonyan because of his bond with, or his experience with Rodgers and stuff. So certainly that's an option there for Tonyan to go on the practice squad, and maybe some of these other guys we've talked about as well. Could Kaleb, would Kaleb Johnson get claimed? Maybe. I don't even know if he would. I honestly don't see a problem with him making it to the practice squad either.
Yeah, I think it might be more likely than not he does get claimed, but I think it would be a worthwhile gamble if you don't think he's really going to be part of your plans in season. I think at that point you can just kind of take the risk.
All right, well, I think that wraps up our conversation today. Again, if you want to have a question answered on a future episode, 412-254-3145. If I spoke too fast, that's in the show notes. We appreciate you guys tuning in. The slow season with not much to talk about is coming to an end. I'm sure you guys have lots of training camp related questions, so send those in to us. We'd love to answer them. Next week will probably be more focused on a preview of training camp than anything else because by the time we do the episode after that, training camp will already be underway. And man, we'll have a lot to talk about. So with all that said, I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.